I'm Brian, you're watching Wildlife on Display, and today we're going to take a look at fire skinks in all their glory. Okay, so for this video, I am going to say I'm going just off, my experience with my setup for my skink, Charmander, and yeah, everything's going to be, a little bit different for everyone when it comes to this hobby. Obviously, to an extent, things have to fall under certain criteria for the care to be, okay. But there's always going to be slight variations in, temperature, humidity, and things like that. And for this video, I'm just going to be sharing how I've been doing it in my setup, and it's worked great for me. So I think I'd like to share it. All right. So when it comes to my setup, this is what I got going on. It's a 40-gallon front opening enclosure. For a lizard this small, a 40-gallon might seem like a lot, but they are pretty active when you're not around. And you could go smaller. A lot of people recommend 20 for these guys for a single adult. I always like to go bigger. 40 seems like a good size for me for mine. A lot of people keep pairs in 40s as well. I haven't done any cohabbing or any breeding or anything with these guys, so a lot of people say it works. I've seen a lot of people do it successfully, but I keep mine alone. It's been doing great in this 40-gallon. Front opening is almost always better for, just building trust with the animal, because it's always better to access the cage from the front rather than from the top like a predator would in these guys' environments. So yeah, it's always better to do front opening. As for the substrate in here, I have a mixture of ABG mix. I have potting soil, and I have the most prominent, substrate is cocoa fiber, and it's worked for me great. He barrels in it great, especially on the humid side, where the water dish is, the really, really humid corner over there. He just makes these crazy tunnels, but I've seen him burrow up all over this, no problem. So that substrate works great. As for hides, I have this main hide over here on the hot side. I've got a couple of little hides lying around, other than that, one on the cold side. And I've got some pothos growing in there. Live plants, I always recommend live plants for these types of humid enclosures, especially for an animal that's as shy as a fire skink, because then that allows you to at least have a pretty enclosure to look at when the fire skink isn't out. And of course, a water bowl on the cool end of the enclosure. Always want to have a water bowl with anything. And yeah, I'm gonna give you guys a closer look at the enclosure now. All right, so here you can see the pothos growing in there. Pretty prominent. On the hot side, I don't have any plants growing, but yeah, I do have this hide here, and he loves this hide. So he uses it a lot, and he's got burrows under there too. I've got these little hides around as well, one over here in front of this main hide, and one over here on the cool side of the enclosure. And then I've got the water bowl kind of dug into the substrate. He's got burrows out behind it. And under it that he uses, and this is what you're going to be looking at mainly with a fire skink enclosure, which is why it's important to make it look good, because usually you're not going to see the fire skink. But yeah, that's the enclosure setup. When it comes to behavior and handling of these guys, this is a very shy species of animal. Handling them, you can do it. You can do it with any animal, but it's not ideal. They're going to be usually stressed out by handling. It's more of a display animal. Even as a display animal, you won't see them around very often, because since it's not an animal that anyone recommends handling often, they're usually going to stay pretty shy. And if you come too close to the enclosure, they will dart back underground. They burrow a lot. Very prolific burrowers. And yeah, if they don't want to be out, they're not going to be out. And usually they don't want to be out. Usually they sense you around and they're going to burrow. When I was getting the footage for this video, actually, my girlfriend was recording the enclosure, and she went outside and, to give it some space to see if it would come out. She put some crickets in there, and we did get some footage of him hunting when she left the room. But as soon as she walked back in the room, you can actually see in the video that she took, the moment that she came in the room was the moment that the skink just darted back under. So, and that was just from her opening the door to the reptile room. So it's, it's a shy species. It's not going to be great handling. They're awesome animals. A lot of people, including myself, animals that burrow, I don't know, there's just something about it that's really cool just to have. Even if you don't get to see them too often, it's just really cool. And it's not like you never see them, I've obviously seen them, and you can put some crickets in there and record the cage and view him that way, and it's really cool footage that you're gonna get. They're awesome hunters. They'll pop out of the ground and come after crickets. Yeah, that's pretty much it for behavior and handling. It's gonna be a shy species, but a fantastic one. All right, quick note about the substrate. You do want to make sure that the substrate layer is substantial. Like at least 2 inches. I would say even this is a little low. Substrate used to be higher than this, but with all the spot cleaning and all that, over the time that I've had them, it's lowered. I am going to get more substrate to top that off, because you do want to have at least a few inches of substrate in these guys' enclosures so that they can burrow properly, because they are, a burrowing species. Okay, so for lighting and heating, I run a UVB strip light all throughout the enclosure. UVB is pretty important to these guys. They're not out a lot while you're around, but they are pretty active and they do come out, and they're diurnal lizards, which means they're out during the day, and in the wild that means they're going to get a lot of sunlight. So it's really important. UVB is important with these guys. Of course, always supplement their crickets or whatever you feed with calcium as well. But yeah, UVB light stretching across the entire enclosure I would recommend. And as for heating, I have on the hot side of this enclosure, I run a heat pad under the tank, because some people run basking lights and it works for them, but I've found that he really doesn't bask all that often. I do shoot footage of the enclosure when I'm away. That's mainly how I check on the animal and see that it's doing okay. And every now and then I'll dig in there and look for him to actually look, see him myself and make sure everything's going good. But I don't like to do that too often because it does stress the animal out. But yeah, from what I've seen, he doesn't really bask a whole lot. So, and since he's under the ground a lot and they're such prolific burrowers, I think it's best to just run an under the tank heater with the UVB light over top, stretching the whole enclosure. That way, even if he's in the cool side, he's still going to get that UVB. So yeah, that's for lighting and heating pretty much. For temperatures, you want to go somewhere, in the 80s with these guys. As you can see, the hot side right now is at 84 degrees, which is, that's great. You can go up to 90. You don't want to go too high. Anything past like 95, I would say is a bit too high, but, somewhere in the 80s works great. 85, 84 works great. And then in the cool end, you want a cooler temperature, obviously, something in the 70s. And right here we have 78. It's a bit high for the cool end, but it's anything in the 70s is going to work. Closer to that water bowl, there's 76, which is good. That's more what you want in the cool end. But yeah, this is pretty much what you want for heating and lighting. And the one last thing about the temperature is obviously, like with most species, you're going to want a nighttime drop in temperature. In ambient temperature. So for this guy, I've got him on a heat pad, so that's going to stay on all the time. But usually just, when I go to bed, I lower the AC, so the ambient temperature would go down anyway. Either way, you just got to find a way for ambient temperatures to go down. Alright, so when it comes to humidity, I live down here in Florida, so I only miss this enclosure about once a week because humidity here is pretty high either way. But what you want is somewhere between 60 and 75. Ideally, you want it around 70, maxing out at around 70% humidity. But yeah, not too humid like with, you know, frog species or amphibians, or there are even some reptiles that require really, really high humidities, like in the 90s, 80s, 90s. They don't want it that high, but they do want it pretty high. So about 60 to 70% humidity works great. All right, so when it comes to feeding, you want to give these guys 2 meals a week, ideally. Seen a lot of people say you want to do 3 or 4. It just depends also how much you're feeding per meal. And, you know, for me, I like to feed like a whole order of crickets, which is like about 15 crickets to these guys per feeding. So if you do that twice a week, you know, spaced out, should be fine. He usually doesn't eat all the crickets in one go. So usually by the time he gets fed the second time, he still has some crickets from the first feeding of the week still in there. So I found that works great. I usually do half of them dusted and half of them not. So the first feeding I do dusted in the week, and then the second feeding I do, you know, not dusted. You do want them to have enough calcium on those crickets so they don't have any issues with MBD or anything like that. But you don't want to have, you know, too much calcium can also cause issues. So you don't want every single cricket dusted. And since this guy's got a UVB strip, you know, on his whole enclosure shining down on him, I like to do calcium without D3 on him, because that way, you know, it's balanced. You don't want too much D3 either. That's also issues there. But yeah, I mean, pretty straightforward feeding. You feed them about, you know, 12, 15 crickets twice a week. That should be good for an adult. And as always with younger skinks, juveniles, you want to be feeding less crickets more often. So in that case, I do suggest something more like 4 or 5 feedings a week of like 4 crickets. And the size is always going to depend on the size of the animal, but usually there's that rule of thumb of feed the size insect that's going to fit between the space between their eyes. So that tends to work out pretty good too. Overall, you know, for an adult like I have here, you want to do twice a week, about 12 to 15 crickets. Usually you don't want, usually with reptiles, you don't want to leave crickets in there. Like, you want to give them the amount that they're going to eat. And for the most part, that's true. But these guys, again, they are burrowed a lot of the time. They are active, they do come out, but it's not like an animal that's going to be, you know, just relaxing outside. If they're going to rest, they're going to go and burrow, and that's how they're going to do it. So I'm not too worried about crickets, you know, eating him or anything like that. I don't see that happening with this species. I've never had anything like that happen, and yep, that's what I would recommend for feeding schedule. And crickets always work best for these guys. They are, in my experience, pretty prolific eaters and hunters. So I'm sure something like dubia roaches or discoid roaches, if you live down here in Florida, I'm sure would work. I'm actually raising a colony of discoid roaches right now, so eventually I'll try to move them onto that. But crickets work great, so you know, that's always what I fed them. All right, and I think that's pretty much going to be the end of the video. I think I've covered most of the things that are most important when it comes to the species. You know, as always, there's going to be stuff missing from any care video you watch. You know, one video is never going to be enough for you to know how to take care of an animal before getting it. You're going to need to, you know, research care sheets on Google, you know, watch other people's care videos, you know, see what they cover. And yeah, but based on my experience and how I've taken care of this species, I think I've covered most of the more important things. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I hope it helped. All right, thanks for watching Wildlife on Display, and hopefully I'll see you on the next video.